Welcome back to 1834. It's 1-0 to Le Bourdonnais. The last two games have been draws, so Le Bourdonnais still has the white pieces. Our last guest commentator was the son of God himself. Let's see who we've got this week. I hope it's somebody just as good. No, they're not good. No, I don't think so. Okay, do we have any good in here at all? Pure evil. Okay, one last chance. Okay, let's stick with Robespierre, the tyrant of France during the French Revolution. Le Bourdonnais has a few questions, but overruled, let's begin. He starts with d4, we have d5, c4 offering the Queen's gambit, and all gentlemen must accept a gambit, so McDonnell accepts. And now usually in this opening, Le Bourdonnais plays his pawn to e3, but this time he plays e4, which is unheard of. So in response, McDonnell creates a new defense to it on the spot. e5, and this is so original that these days it bears his name. It's now known as the Queen's Gambit accepted central variation, the McDonnell defense. So very nice. Le Bourdonnais of course panics and he pushes d5. Now maybe knight to f3 would have been better, but McDonnell is also caught up in the excitement and pushes f5. So again, maybe knight to f6 would have been better, but that's not what he played. Now McDonnell's extra pawn here is undefended. It can be captured by the bishop, but first Le Bourdonnais plays his knight to c3. McDonnell also develops his knight to f6, and now the bishop captures the undefended pawn, whilst also developing. McDonnell develops his dark square bishop, and now we have knight to f3. We have queen to e7 from McDonnell, and bishop to g5 from Le Bourdonnais. And here, Robespierre says, the bishops represent the old order, a feudal and aristocratic society that oppressed the common people and maintained the privileges of the wealthy. In a society that values equality and liberty, the bishops have no place, as they seek to perpetuate inequality and undermine the progress of the revolution. McDonnell immediately takes this to heart and sacrifices his bishop. But it's not really a bishop sacrifice, because after it's captured, you're bringing your queen to c5, giving a check, and after the king moves, you're picking up the light square bishop here. But Le Bourdonnais is not really interested in playing McDonnell's game, so instead of capturing the bishop, he just moves his king to f1, and McDonnell gets his bishop out of there, all the way back to b6, so now McDonnell is up a pawn. Le Bourdonnais plays qe2, the Queen Elizabeth move, and McDonnell simply pushes f4. We have rook to d1 from Le Bourdonnais getting behind his advanced pawn, and McDonnell develops his light square bishop to pin the knight. Le Bourdonnais pushes his advanced pawn now, which threatens the queen, and of course McDonnell just captures it with his c-pawn. Le Bourdonnais sends his knight into this knight outpost now. It's threatening the knight and the queen. This knight can't capture the knight because the queen will be lost. But here, out of nowhere, McDonnell activates beast mode and captures the knight to sacrifice his queen. Robespierre heartily approves. He doesn't like queens or bishops or even kings. So Le Bourdonnais is happy to capture the queen, and McDonnell has a choice of capturing the bishop with the king or the knight. He does neither. Instead, he brings his knight to e3, which is a fork on the king and the rook. So the king moves aside to e1 and McDonnell captures the bishop. So what is McDonnell doing here? Well, he's captured the bishop instead of the rook here because he wants to keep the knight on the nice outpost firmly embedded in white's position. So for his queen, he's got two minor pieces. That was the knight here and the bishop here. And he's also got these three connected central pawns, which are very strong, as well as the monster knight. So let's continue. Queen to d3, getting out of the bishop's firing line, although the rook is still under attack as well as from the knight, and the knight's also attacking the g2 pawn, which will come with check. But for now, McDonnell just leaves all of this alone and brings his rook across to d8 to x-ray the queen again. Le Bourdonnais plays his rook to d2, getting it out of all of the attacks as well as defending the g2 pawn, and here McDonnell just develops his knight to c6. Le Bourdonnais plays b3, adding another defender to the bishop, and now we have bishop to a5, pinning the rook against the king now. And we have a3 from Le Bourdonnais. He's probably worried about this knight coming to b4, so that would threaten the queen and cause lots of problems, so he's pushed a3. Rook on a to c8 along the nice open file, and because this rook can no longer defend this pawn because it's pinned, Le Bourdonnais brings his other rook to g1 to do it instead. Maybe a nice, slow, calm and collected move for McDonnell would be to push his g-pawn, but we know McDonnell, he's not interested in any of those things. He wants to accelerate. He pushes b5, attacks the bishop. But this pawn is undefended, so Le Bourdonnais just captures it. So what is McDonnell doing here? Well, he wants to bring his knight into d4 and look for more forking opportunities. This would immediately attack the bishop, but first of all, he needs to get rid of the knight which is defending this square. So he captures with the bishop, the pawn captures back, and now the knight comes into d4 and attacks the bishop. But you'll notice this pawn is undefended, and this knight can come in here and fork pretty much everything except for the queen. So Le Bourdonnais needs to decide what to do. He decides that he's going to save his bishop. He brings it back to c4 and blocks the open file again. And of course, McDonnell just captures the pawn and forks everything. Le Bourdonnais brings his king to f2, and the knight captures the rook, which is defended by the bishop. Note, by the way, that Le Bourdonnais' queen can't actually move anywhere without getting captured. Let's just highlight this for you. It's quite crazy. The only square that it can actually go to is e2, but if it does that, the important central pawn is lost because this knight will capture it with check. So a bit of a bind for the queen here. So what does Le Bourdonnais do? He captures the g7 pawn, which comes with check. The king has to move. It threatens the rook. The rook has one more check backed up by the bishop, so the king moves again. Le Bourdonnais has run out of checks now, so he brings his rook over to b7. We have the knight on d capturing the bishop. The pawn captures it back, and the rook captures the pawn. Le Bourdonnais brings his queen over to b1. At least it's doubled up with the rook here, but McDonnell just blocks this combination with his bishop, and it also x-rays the king. So the king gets out of the line of fire. Maybe queen to e2 would be better, but he goes to f3 instead. And this isn't so good because he's going to start getting pushed towards the edge of the board. McDonnell brings his rook down to c3, x-raying the king again, and Le Bourdonnais plays his queen to a2. What's he doing with this move? Well, it looks like he's going for e6, hoping to give some checks and maybe in combination with the rook cause some trouble. And McDonnell is not having any of this. He blocks this idea with the knight whilst revealing the check. So the king has to move again, and the king goes to g4. We have rook to g8, again x-raying the king, and we have the rook capturing b6, giving up the rook for the bishop, and the pawn captures back. Le Bourdonnais moves his king out of the x-ray one more time, but now he's on the edge of the board with no more moves. McDonnell gets his king out of the way to let the rook through, and Le Bourdonnais brings his queen to e2, trying to mount some sort of last-ditch effort at defense. We now have rook to g6 from McDonnell. He's trying to come across to this square to give the checkmate. And we have queen to h5 to block it from Le Bourdonnais, but this is the last effort that he's going to make, because after knight to e3, he resigned the game. So well done, McDonnell. That was awesome. Let's just play out the last few moves that Le Bourdonnais saw coming. The basic threat here is the knight coming to g2. For example, if the pawn moves, you bring the knight in, and it's checkmate with the rooks guarding all of the squares. There is a way to slow down the inevitable. You bring your queen to f3, but then you play the same knight move, and you have to give up the queen. And no matter what you do from here, you're losing very quickly. For example, you push the pawn, this one is captured. Now both these pawns here are stuck, they can't move, so you have to let the king have his only last move, and then you execute him with the rook coming across. There is one more way to delay the coup de grace, and that is to capture the rook here with the queen. After the pawn captures, again, no matter which pawn move you do, for example this one, the rook is now coming over the top, and whichever pawn move you do, let's try this one. The rook comes across, this square is covered by the knight, this square is covered by the pawn, this square is covered by the king, and the rook is just executing the king. So very nicely done. Robespierre heartily approves. It's now 1-1 between the players. They're completely level. So join me again next time to see what happens next.